I'm Alex from Board Game Co, and today I'm giving my first impressions of Rove Anchorpoint from Addicts Games. Rove Anchorpoint is a standalone game set in the Rove universe. Before I go further, this is a prototype, all rules and components have exchanged, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. Rove Anchorpoint is standalone. It's a smaller box, it's basically Rove, but more accessible. Think Jaws of the Lion relative to Gloomhaven, which is a fitting comparison considering that the designer of Rove and Rove Anchorpoint is the designer of Gloomhaven Crimson Scales, the largest fan expansion for any board game, and one of the most well-received fan expansions for a board game. And he went ahead and then went on to design Rove, and now we have Rove Anchorpoint. Rove Anchorpoint is going to give you the core gameplay of Rove, but it's guiding you through the experience. We're going to start with the campaign book over here, and again, prototype everything I have, but the general idea is going to be what you're encountering. We start off with your story, your background, and then we start going into choosing your characters, some brief overview of what the components have to do, and then diving into your first encounter. You're going to be slowly going through this, finding out the various rows, getting a bit more information about them, choosing those characters, before diving into the actual gameplay, where you start setting up for that first scenario. This is where we're going to have tests of eyes. The gameplay, again, those first 3 pages giving you some background, helping you select your characters, and then getting you set up for your first scenario, which is not going to give you all the rules because it's going to guide you through this one at a time. So you start off with some of the elements of the gameplay. There is an entire rulebook you could read through. You don't need to read through this. I've played through the 5 scenarios that are in this prototype over here, and I have referenced this rulebook once or twice, but I have not read the rulebook because the whole point of this is that you shouldn't have to. Walking through the campaign guide, and then going to the individual page of the scenario is going to give you all the information you need. This is where we're going to set up for test of eyes. You can read through the basic overview of what's happening here. Then you set up for the adversary you're going to be facing off against. This is going to be your enemies book. We grab one of our little markers to mark what action the enemies are going to take, and then we dive into the scenario. We set up our characters, putting them on any of these flag spaces. We take the enemies, putting them on the spaces suitable for the number of players, and then we dive into taking our turns, trying to take down the enemies before they take us down. Keeping in mind, these first 3 scenarios, they're kind of gimmies. They're not really games that you're going to lose. They're designed to get you, the player, introduced to the game. To that end, the core structure is you're going to be taking actions on your player board. I'm set up with the Pugilist and the Thermal Flux. We'll talk a bit more about the characters when I get into my first impressions, but these 2 characters, you're going to be taking 2 basic actions. To take a basic action, you look at their board and you slide one of these up and you do what's on there. I'm going to go ahead and jump forward 4. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, jumping over there. Despite the fact that this is a rock and it's in the way, I can jump over it. I also could have just gone that way, but I wanted to show you that you could jump over a rock, so I did that. You're going to go ahead and do that, then you possibly take one of these actions. In this case, I can't really heal right now because we're at full health. And over here, this action, the Pugilist is effectively kind of a hit and run specialist. They're an assassin who marks their targets and then does higher amounts of damage to them than you otherwise might expect. But you have to mark them. They mark them by jumping around through them. Think of it as flipping over their back, planting a little something on them, and then being able to hit them again and again. But I wasn't close enough, so I won't be able to do that this round. And this action over here, not much else I can do. So unfortunately, for this starting turn, there's really not a lot that I can do. Over here with this character, the Thermal Flux, we'll go ahead and move forward 3. We'll go for, well, let's start over here. Let's pretend we're starting over here. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3, and then again, same problem. I can't really do anything because I'm just not close enough. Oh, this is a jump as well. 1, 2, 3, there we go. It's a jump. I forgot about that. The reason I forgot about that is because on the other side of this, we have a movement action because the nature of the Thermal Flux is they have 2 states that they are swapping between, Blaze and Freeze. And as they swap states, they also swap their tiles. Normally, classes do not have swappable tiles, so that's going to be something unique to the Thermal Flux character. But again, we do a jump 3, we go 1, 2, 3, we're close to that enemy, but again, not a lot we can do. We can't heal, and we can't really attack. That's what the enemies are going to activate. You're going to look at their board. They're going to attack us with range 2 to 3, and then doing 2 damage, but you are going to modify that. So we'll have this guy attack this because this is the 1 over here. So we'll have him attack the Pugilist. We'll roll the die. That is not going to have any effect over here. Each character has a little chart of the elements that will modify the damage potentially, but that's going to be a dim, which has no effect at all. So no adjustment up, down, or neutral. We're just going to do the standard 2 damage to the Pugilist, marking off 2 damage, which the good news means this I can now heal going forward. This character over here, we're going to roll the die over here and see what they do. They roll a flame. A flame in this case, unfortunately, has no, well, fortunately, I guess for me, has no impact on the damage total. And so in this case, it's not not going to do any extra damage, it's just going to do the basic 2 damage. So again, we'll take 2 damage markers, putting them on our character. That would be a starting turn. From there, we're going to repeat the cycle. This time around, we can do a bit more. For example, the pugilist will reset their markers. This time around, they could jump through it, going 1, 2, 3. They put a little marker on that character, marking them. So they're going to put this on spot 1 to show that they are a marked character. And then we can go ahead and now do an attack action. Again, rolling the modifier die. We got a blue. Blue is +1, so we're going to deal 3 damage to that character, marking 3 damage in their box. That's the basic cycle you're going to be doing. You're going to be taking actions on your core board. We're having a back and forth between you and the enemies until you eventually resolve the scenario, at which point you'll flip this open, you'll read through it, you'll go to the next page, and you'll earn some coins, some currency and all that, and then we go on to Test of Claw, because again, this is designed to get you introduced to the rules one at a time. Those of you who are familiar with Rove will say, well, what about your cards? You have hands full of cards in Rove. What's going on with your rallies, your raves, your reacts? What's happening with these cards? And the answer is, you don't have them yet. This is designed to get new players up and running, and that's one less thing that they have to worry about, at least for that first scenario. That's where we dive into the second scenario, and we introduce the cards. Now we have new cards. In addition to the basic actions you can take on your turn, you also have a hand of cards, which give you extra actions. You get to play 1 card per turn, assuming you can pay the cost, because sometimes there is an element cost that you have to consume those elements to do the card, but very often the cards are going to give you extra abilities, ways to earn elements, and when you play a card, you flip it to its opposing side, where it generally will have a higher cost than the opposing side, although that's lower or higher, depends which side you start on, and then you can hopefully be able to cash that back in to do a stronger action by paying a bunch of elements in. So you are trying to get your elements so you can power up your cards, and sometimes modify the effects of your cards depending on the actions you spent. This one over here, you can do a 2 jump, but if you go ahead and burn a water element when you do so, you can do a further 2 jump as well. So the cards get more and more powerful, not just based on consuming stuff, but based on what you consume as well. Those are going to be your basic rally and raves, and then you also have a general react card, something that can do a reaction either on your turn or the enemy turn. So for example, this one, doing your move or jump action, you can go ahead and modify it, and then when you flip it, after you mark a unit, you can go ahead and do one of those actions. Sometimes there'll be defensive things like when you're attacked, when you take damage, there'll be a bunch of reactions. Each character has 1 reaction card, one of the characters actually has 2 reaction cards and 4 rally rave cards, but characters have reaction cards as well as rally and rave, and you'll learn that in scenario 2, along with having a new set of enemies to go ahead and face off against. You're going to continue that cycle through the first 4 scenarios. The first 4 scenarios are designed to introduce you to new things one at a time. So we have the basic turn structure in scenario 1. We have the cards being introduced in scenario 2. Then we have various either fields being introduced in scenario 3. These are fields that can be placed onto the board to have different modifications. A unit that begins on its turn on wildfire takes 1 additional damage. Snap Frost slows down units. There's different things that will have different impacts from these various either fields that place onto the board. You learn about traps as well in scenario 3. That's the test of wits. In scenario 4, we start learning a bit more about the nature of pushing and pulling. Well, we do a little bit of pushing and pulling in scenario 3, but we have more of the enemies doing that in scenario 4 as you take on your first little mini boss character. He's an ally of yours. He's testing you. He's playing around. That's all in the story. But you have your little mini boss with a larger base. So you start learning how to interact with larger base characters and how those things interact with the game. And then finally from there, you get to go on to either scenario 5 or 6. There's a bit of a choose your own adventure as far as which full-fledged scenario do you want to take on now that you've had all the elements put together for you. That's what the prototype has to offer. The full scenario, the full game is going to give you a lot more, including upgrading your characters, because for example, these boards over here, they do upgrade to the opposing side. There's also items which you didn't really get into. There's a whole item deck, which already has gone through some changes over here, so I'm not going to heavily focus on it. They've gone through some development changes as to how they work, but over here, you'll flip to level 2 once you're done with that, and then you can even further power up, moving to a modified version of your rover. There's all these upgrading and cards you're going to be swapping into your deck as you continue to play through it, but none of that you really get to experience in the prototype. The prototype guides you through the first 5 scenarios. It's telling you how to play the game, and the final game will give you all of that, but additionally with the character upgrading at the same time. That's what Rove Anchorpoint is. Those of you who are familiar with Rove will recognize this for what it is. It's a accessible way to dive into the world of Rove without having to read a very large rulebook. You get spoon-fed the rules as you go through them, but it still does deliver Rove to you, and it does so with 4 new characters, which is a good time to dive into my first impressions of this game, with the disclaimer that I should note that I am friends with the designer of Rove, with the owner of Addicts Games. I run Level Up Retreat together together with them, so take that potential bias into account. But also, I won't really be giving a lot of opinion here, and I'll explain why that is and how this all works. And I have covered Rove before. I've given my thoughts on Rove, and my thoughts on Rove Anchorpoint are most of the same, pros and cons. So let's get into my general first impressions here. And the main reason I'm calling it first impressions is for all that I have played Rove a lot by now. I have played the original base game of Rove. I've played it multiple times through various stages of development. I've gotten, I don't know, I've probably gotten 10 to 20 plays of Rove in by now, but one of the biggest problems and frustrations I have had with Rove is that I've never actually gotten full character progression in. I've never gotten to fully see how characters develop. I've gotten a little bit of card upgrading. I've never gotten to see the advanced versions of Rovers, and only a little bit of upgrading, so I haven't really seen a lot of progression because I kept diving into it at various stages of development. Even now, playing another 5 scenarios of Rove Anchorpoint is still starting from scratch, which means I haven't gotten to see real development within the world of Rove, which means my thoughts on Rove have always been based off of seeing partial aspects of the product, which is just, it's a slightly frustrating place to be in because I can't give you my full thoughts on Rove or on Rove Anchorpoint until I properly get to see those elements, which I haven't done so yet. So that's going to be a big caveat to the nature of my thoughts and impressions. So I'll give you my general impressions of Rove from what I've played so far, but with that caveat in place, and then I'll give you my thoughts on Rove Anchorpoint as far as what it's doing and who it's for and all of that. Generally, Rove, and I'll note that the gameplay between Rove and Rove Anchorpoint are functionally very, very similar. I'm sure there are differences that I'm not necessarily even noticing. They are very similar as far as the core gameplay of what you're doing. But Rove overall, it's hard not to talk about Rove without referencing Gloomhaven. This definitely does have some degree, and again, it's designed by somebody who designed a huge Gloomhaven expansion, designed by somebody who's very into that world. It definitely feels like there's a lot of similarities between Rove and between Gloomhaven. It feels like Rove was designed to be more accessible, easier to table than Gloomhaven, capturing all the magic of it, but making some things just easier to deal with. You don't have to deal with decks of cards for your enemies. You have this progression system instead, which I didn't really talk about, but as you go through it, generally you're going to have the enemy taking their first action, and then on subsequent turns you roll the die, and it tells you how that moves 1, 2, or 3 forward, constantly looping around. So you have different amounts, you never really know what they're going to do, you know it's one of those actions when an enemy takes their turn. And so it kind of has that appeal of Gloomhaven as far as how it's generally trying to operate, but doing so with less maintenance in a lot of areas. Less maintenance on the enemy cards, less maintenance on your own hand. Your own hand is flipping around, you have some core actions locked in, so you never have to worry about discarding a card for basic movement because you have basic movement on your core action. So a lot of those things are very much present. And some of these changes I think are better, at least better for me, and some I kind of prefer the way Gloomhaven does it, which means I've always been a little mixed, thinking that Rove does have a lot of pros in its camp, but in some areas it's better than Gloomhaven, in some areas it's worse than Gloomhaven. The areas that are better, I think the significantly less maintenance and the managing of the enemies, or even just the ability to tactically look at what an enemy might do, gives you a lot more kind of tactical choice as opposed to feeling surprised or having to really learn an enemy's deck. You kind of see the potential options in front of you, and that does allow for a lot of planning. I know the enemy might hit me at 2 range, I know they might move 1 and hit me. Either way, I have options that I can plan around based on what's coming. You can make an argument that you shouldn't really know what an enemy could do, but you're going to learn it eventually as you play Gloomhaven. This skips that kind of step and just gives you the information up front. On the other hand, I don't like the flipping cards mechanic in Rove as much as I do the top-bottom aspect in Gloomhaven. That aspect of kind of having your hand in front of you, I've always found it a little bit more tedious to have to like remember, okay, on that side is that, on that side is that. This is one of those things that as you learn your character, it's likely to be less of an issue, but I still find I'm constantly looking back and forth between the sides of my hand and spending a little bit more time trying to manage the flipping puzzle and not finding it quite as satisfying. Outside of that, it's going to appeal to the same people who like Gloomhaven. Again, it has a lot of, I think if you like Gloomhaven, this is certainly a game worth checking out because it has a lot of that core DNA present, but it has some things that are changes, well, it has a bunch of changes. Some for me are better and some for me are less so. So overall, Rove in general is a tactically sound, Gloomhaven-esque style game that removes a lot of the maintenance while changing up. One of the things that, again, depending on what you like or don't like, the fact that you're guaranteed various actions on your board, you always have access to basic move actions that are slightly stronger than they might be compared to discarding a Gloomhaven card. And those things are all very present. Keeping in mind, by the way, that I'm just giving my thoughts on Rove right now. This has nothing to do with Rove Anchorpoint because, again, they are functionally similar. When it comes to Rove Anchorpoint, the main thing that's going to be different is going to be the way the game drips you into that. And coming from someone who hasn't played Rove in, I don't know, whenever I last played the prototype, you can watch my video of the prototype review of Rove way back when. I want to say over a year ago is when I last played Rove. So diving into Rove Anchorpoint again, I can say that for the most part, this did so very well. I say for the most part because that's where it does get a tiny little asterisk on hopefully prototype issues. There were one or two things that I did need clarification from that weren't quite as clear to me from the journey, but outside of those one or two clarifications, this did do a good job at slowly drip feeding mechanics to me so I can dive back into the world of Rove. And actually, one of the things that's funny is some of the things that I needed clarification on were because I already knew Rove and I had to figure out, long story short, I wasn't clear to me that we don't use cards in Scenario 1 and you don't use cards in Scenario 1. But that's something that's only an issue because I already know Rove. But again, that said, Rove Anchorpoint does drip feed you into the experience. It lets you learn a handful of pages. You are not reading a giant rulebook. Again, I have not read that rulebook yet. I've only referenced it as needed, which was one or two times. And even then I'm questioning whether I really needed to because the information was kind of... Once or twice I looked through the rulebook, I barely needed to touch the rulebook. I walked through the campaign guide, which walked me through the basic selecting of a character. I dove straight in, putting my characters here, reading all the various sections of the box and the game flow, and then just being able to go straight into the gameplay with the game introducing concepts as it goes. Again, this is something that Jaws of the Lion did very well for Gloomhaven, and Rove Anchorpoint is doing the same thing here. So if the thing that's been holding you off on trying a big box experience like Rove is the fact that you don't want to deal with that rules overhead, I do think Rove Anchorpoint makes it very accessible and very easy to dive into, which is exactly the type of thing that is trying to be. This is trying to be an entry point into the world of Rove, guiding you into the strategy while not compromising on that strategy as you continue to play it, while also giving you 4 new characters. Speaking of the characters, I've only played fully as these 2 characters. I've briefly read the blurbs on what these guys do as I was selecting characters. These 2 just sounded more up my alley as I was choosing them, so I went with these. But Ashwood over here is going to be working with an either grove as using cultivate abilities to placing tokens on them. You have to manage a bit of a kind of a moving grove, as it were. Threaded Fate is going to have various web tokens that are going to be consumed by your reaction cards. Both of these seemed interesting, but I don't really heavily dive into them, so I can't talk a lot about them. I will say the Thermal Flux and the Pugilist, I'm very happy with the choices. Well, having not played the others, but I'm happy with the choices. The Pugilist acts as a functional assassin, which I always enjoy characters like that. He has to get up close and personal, but he dances in, then he starts taking blows. Can be very satisfying. His cards play into that nicely. I really enjoyed the Pugilist a lot as a new character. And Thermoflux as well. There's a little bit of a timing indicator because you kind of have to change forms. You have some control over the pacing of it, but you have to change forms. I like being in flame form and blaze form, but there are some pros to freeze form. I like that back and forth of adjusting forms, and again, having a character that has 2 different sides to these tokens, which is something new, or at least not something new from what I've seen in Rove. I enjoy what the Thermal Flux has to offer. So if you are a fan of Rove, there's 4 new characters here. If you aren't a fan of Rove yet, this is a good entry point to diving into the world of Rove. But that's kind of where the first impressions can end, because I can tell you that this feels like Rove, pros and cons, and it's a great entry point to Rove. The biggest challenge I have had for me is that I've only really covered Rove in Rove and Rove Anchorpoint. I've only really covered them in prototype forms, which means I've never gotten to experience the full arc of watching a character fully develop as I play through it. That's the downside of being of covering prototypes as opposed to covering the final game of it, which just means I don't feel fully equipped to give you proper, fully developed thoughts and opinions on this. So that's where we are with Rove and Rove Anchorpoint. As far as game recommendations, definitely check out Jaws of the Lion if you're looking for, if you like Rove Anchorpoint, if you like that kind of thing. Jaws of the Lion is a game that I've fully played through and really enjoyed the overall arc of it. Again, they feel very, very similar as far as what they're trying to do for their respective big brothers. And if you're looking for another big box game that is fairly accessible and easy to dive into, check out Agamonia, which is another campaign kind of game experience that I felt was very accessible and easy to play. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this helpful in some way, and as always, I hope you have a good one.